this is the Qiaodan TG1.0 or the Lately 1.0. At first glance, it looks like a max cushion shoe, especially with the massive sidewalls. You'd think that your foot would sit up top here. It really just sits below here. So if we measure that, it's really not that max stack by today's standards, but it is still a healthy amount of stack. It even dropped to around 1,800 pesos at one point. I don't know if it got even lower than that. Ignoring the price, it just didn't feel like what it was hyped up to be. It's advertised with a wide pace range of 4 minutes 30 seconds to 7 minutes per kilometer. After close to 150 kilometers running in this one, this wasn't what I was hoping for, but I wanted to be fair, so I skipped doing a first impressions video and gave this more mileage. I don't want to give a verdict too early that a shoe hurt me when the truth is my form was probably off or my gait sucked because I was carrying fatigue. Sometimes you don't feel it right away. It just comes and affects how you run without you even noticing it. Right now, I'm not yet in my peak weeks or in my training block. There's accumulated fatigue starting, but not to a point where I would question myself why I signed up for a marathon. Still, this shoe really did make me wonder. Again, not quite what I hoped for, but I gave it more time, so now I guess I've gathered all that I could. The first 30 kilometers actually felt great, a bit stiff, but a good kind of stiff. It still was pretty flexible. It had good turnover. It had that nice pop from the airy PIBA that the midsole is made of. It's a mix of PIBA and EVA, I guess. The B-roll shots you'll see in this video is from those first few runs where you could even see how it's springy, resilient, and the squishy nature of it. But after 30 kilometers, well, that's where I skipped doing a first impressions video because I'll explain in the ride and feel section. Let's go over to the specs and fit first. Listed stack is 35 millimeters in the forefoot and 42 millimeters in the heel, though it's unclear what reference size they use. When I measured my US 10, I got around 36 millimeters in the forefoot and 44 millimeters in the heel, and that was including the insole. Now, the proper way to measure is to actually just cut the shoe in half and then measure from the middle where you made that cut. My method is a bit rough. I'm just using my fingers to gauge the depth inside, sort of estimate where they line up. It's not millimeter accurate, but my method is at least more realistic than those using fancy calipers, and they actually include the full sidewall, which is really one of my pet peeves. On a US size 8, it's listed at 245 grams. Mine is 271 grams in US 10. Pretty light considering the amount of foam that you see here. The foam is also called Q Kung Fu Pro, the same name across their higher end lineup, but I think it's EVA mixed with some PIBA. Doesn't feel like typical PIBA though, not that poppy or springy. Well, when it was new, it did have that pop, but after 150 kilometers or so, it did kind of lose that. Now, it's not officially listed as 2E wide. Some stores list it as wide feet and fits semi-wide, but more of a roomy fit up top of your toes rather than the width. Outsole is also called CPU rubber, which seems tougher than what I found on the Win 3TR, and I find this one pretty grippy too. It's a jacquard mesh upper. There are some folds around the toe area, but the upper is flexible enough that they didn't really bother me. It's not a premium kind of soft, but it's also not stiff either. So again, fit wise, it's close to 2E, wide-ish, but very roomy up top above your toes. It's also not sloppy. No unnecessary pull tab, just thin overlays in the laces, toe reinforcement, and the logo on the side. It overall helps keep the shoe very light. There's a good amount of heel padding, enough to feel at least slightly comfy without actually overdoing it. I did feel some hot spots on the left arch of my left foot, and on my right foot, it's under the ball of my forefoot. Probably the insoles were rubbing against my socks during those long runs. Anyway, that's all I have for specs. Now let's talk about the ride and feel. Like I said earlier, it felt good when it was new, but around the 30-kilometer mark, things started to change. The first 60 kilometers felt like it was really breaking in. There was this slight bulge in the the forefoot that eventually went away, and once it did, I could feel the rocker when leaning forward. This was still when it was new, and it kind of had that poppiness to it. It was soft but had that firmer kind of resilience, which gave that good pop. On my next few runs, I did some intervals. That's when it gave me this kind of like a Zoom X kind of feel, like the Invincible one, that once you go faster than the foam could handle, it actually felt quite out of control. Like it's a lot of air on that PIBA with the high rebound actually throwing off your gait a bit. Also when you're going up slightly too fast. After a few more runs, it settled down. I took it for a 21-kilometer long run with around 6:30 per kilometer pace, which was nothing really fast. The ride actually felt more stable and it still had that good response, but then around 13 to 15 kilometers it started to actually feel flat. And when I say flat, I don't actually mean that it lost its softness and then just became like a brick. The response wasn't really quite what it used to be. Weeks later, I did a 32-kilometer long run. That time I was tired from training. That week I had a 12-kilometer long run at 5:30 pace, 14 kilometers of intervals, leg days at the gym, and easy runs sprinkled around. The fatigue was definitely from training, not the shoe. So you could argue that the flat feeling that showed up 15 to 16 kilometers was my fatigue. But remember, the first 21-kilometer long run I did, I was fresh. And I did an 8-kilometer and a 13-kilometer easy runs after that, and the return wasn't quite there anymore. The following week, I felt great, and I could definitely tell that it was the shoe. When I was fatigued, it had this tiring kind of effect. When I felt like Superman the next week, it wasn't that tiring, but it really was sort of flat. It still has that softness, but the rebound sort of became less. Not really what I expected for a shoe with some stack height. I remembered the product info listing the pace range, so if it's not a cushion shoe or for recovery, as it doesn't really make you feel good when your legs are tired, then this could just be a fast up tempo shoe. But then it's not. It's not nimble. It's not clunky really, but there's a bit more heft to it than what you'd expect from a true nimble fast shoe. At marathon pace, around 5:30 minutes per kilometer, it actually felt like more effort to maintain that speed. Again, this is not a heavy shoe. The weight is actually fine, but just doesn't translate to a good up-tempo feel for me. Now, a reviewer I trust mentioned that for him it was tiring to run in, and I get what he meant. For me, it's not exactly tiring, but once the flat feeling sets in, it just feels like slightly like a dead weight when picking up the pace. When I was running slow, you could still feel that slight energy return or a little bit of that decompression. When you run fast, it just wasn't the same like when it was new, where it had that pop. And for me, if the response or energy return doesn't really quite aid you into popping off the ground, at least have some good turnover. To its credit though, it doesn't really bottom out completely like soft foams do, like all the way down with no bounce or resilience. This just lacks that spring or that pop that makes you feel like the shoe is alive. I guess the hype is BS. At least in my experience, this wasn't like what it's hyped up to be. Some would call it a cheap super trainer even. For Uptempo, it doesn't even deliver. I don't also see this as a good cushion shoe. It doesn't have to be an excellent cushion shoe. As a daily trainer, I would prefer something like the leaning weighing 5 over this. Similarly, a bit flat on Uptempo as well. Quite good on easy runs and does go down a bit cheaper than this. You could also stretch out that shoe to up to 32 kilometers. I would stick to it up to 21, but you could probably pull it off. Now, I'm not saying that the weighing 5 is way better. It just has that slight foam reaction on easy runs. It's the same as this one that lacks energy return at up-tempo workouts. It is also heavier than this one, but that one has a better roll and actually feels smoother. It doesn't really give that kind of heavy or tiring kind of feel. But again, to me, at least this is still a proper running shoe. If you got absorbed with the hype and fell for it, you want a more livelier experience, a more reactive cushion for longer runs, the Ying 4 Pro is a better pick. It's priced closer and it's slightly heavier though. If you can stretch your budget, get the Anta PG7 Ultra. It's around 3,000 pesos plus, but it does have a better foam, better upper, and really has much better value. It actually delivers based on its pace suggestion. If you want more punch, the Qiaodan PB 3.0 Enhanced Edition is worth a look. It's around the same price range. It's faster, cushioned, and carbon plated. You can race in it too. I haven't tried it. The reviews about it are promising. If you're not into stiff carbon plates, the Peak Up 30 4.0 is another option. So now to my final thoughts. There are cushion shoes and there are shoes that just have stack hype. The worst are the overpriced ones from big brands that just end up as expensive paperweight. The TG 1.0 is awkward. Like, it's trying to be a soft cushion shoe with up-tempo performance, but it doesn't really nail either. It doesn't deliver on fast up-tempo performance, and even on long runs, it goes flat pretty early. It doesn't deliver on versatility that it claims, so I guess you shouldn't expect much if you really want to get this shoe. Being fair and ignoring the hype, it really just works as an easy day trainer. Shorter runs, slightly slower paces, not quite a good daily, but at least it is still a proper running shoe. Because again, when I say it's flat, I don't mean it's dead. It's still functional, and while it doesn't perform above its price, it is priced accordingly. Around 2,000 pesos or under $50. It's better than something like the Adidas Duramo or the Nike Downshifter. But in the Chinese shoe market, it's outclassed even by Qiaodan's own lineup. If it's meant to be a standard daily trainer, probably they could have just trimmed down the foam and made it lighter and probably even cheaper. That would probably have made more sense. Anyway, that's just my take. It's my video after all, and that's my experience, but your experience might be different. Maybe you like the TG 1.0 and think it's awesome. Put it down in the comments, as it might help others decide better based on your opposite take. And if you're in my region dealing with all these earthquakes lately and just survived the typhoon, please stay safe.